Can you go on a date with me? I asked. The alien woman smiled and gave an incredible reaction. The observation deck of the Celestial Harmony hummed with the soft vibration of quantum engines, a gentle reminder that they were suspended between stars, neither here nor there in the vast emptiness of space. Dominic stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the swirling nebula that painted the viewport in shades of purple and gold. Behind him, the diplomatic reception continued, a carefully orchestrated dance of species and cultures, all pretending that a decade of war hadn't nearly torn the galaxy apart. "You're avoiding the party," came a melodic voice, its harmonics suggesting it originated from a throat not quite designed for human languages. Dominic turned to find Penelope approaching, her crystalline skin catching the nebula's light and refracting it into 1,000 tiny rainbows across the deck. She was Urathi, one of the elder species that had watched humanity claw its way into the stars with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Her people had existed for millennia before humans had even discovered fire. "I could say the same about you, Ambassador," Dominic replied with a slight smile. Penelope's facial membranes rippled in what he'd learned was the Urathi equivalent of a laugh. "I have been to 3,417 diplomatic functions in my lifetime. They lose their charm after the first 1,000. How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?" "By your measurements?" "Approximately 432 years. Dominic whistled low. Humanity's alliance with the elder species was still new, still fragile. The Urathi had been particularly skeptical of Earth's admission to the Galactic Council. Humanity was too young, too volatile, too prone to conflict. And yet, when the Krishna swarm had descended from dark space, it had been human ingenuity that had turned the tide. "You know," Penelope said, moving to stand beside him at the viewport, "I voted against your species' inclusion in the council." "I heard," Dominic said, unfazed. "You gave quite the speech from what I understand. Something about children playing with fusion torches in a powder magazine." Her membranes rippled again. "You've done your research. It's my job. Cultural liaison and all that." He paused, then added, "For what it's worth, you weren't entirely wrong." Penelope turned her elegant head toward him, her 3 eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of surprise. "That's a remarkably mature admission for a human." "We're not all hotheads and adrenaline junkies," Dominic said, "though I'll admit we have more than our fair share." He gestured toward the party behind them, where a human naval officer was engaged in what appeared to be an arm wrestling match with a 4-armed Grendel warrior. Case in point. "And yet," Penelope said softly, "when the swarm came, when species with 100 times your experience froze in terror, your people flew their fragile ships into the heart of the enemy without hesitation. The Urathi have many words for foolishness. We had none for that particular brand of courage." "Desperation, maybe," Dominic offered. "We're good at that." "We've had a lot of practice on Earth." "No." Penelope's voice carried a weight that made Dominic turn to face her fully. "I have studied your species extensively since the war. I have watched your histories, read your literature, analyzed your psychology. What you called desperation, what we called foolishness, I believe it is something else entirely." "What's that?" "Hope," she said simply. "Reckless, unreasonable, utterly irrational hope. Every species reaches a point in their development where they accept the limitations of reality. We Urathi did so 200,000 years ago. We built our civilization on the principle of calculated sustainability. We would never reach beyond our grasp, never risk more than we could afford to lose." She turned back to the nebula, her light-refracting skin creating patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. "And then we met humanity, a species barely out of their gravity well, facing extinction, who looked at impossible odds and decided the problem wasn't the odds, it was that they hadn't tried hard enough yet. Dominic felt something shift in his chest. He'd spent the last 6 months working alongside Penelope, had come to respect her wisdom and precision, but he'd never heard her speak with such passion. "Penelope," he said, his voice suddenly rougher than he intended. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. This is going to sound absolutely insane, and feel free to tell me if I'm committing some horrible diplomatic incident, but—" He took a breath. "Here goes nothing. Can you go on a date with me?" The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Penelope's crystalline body went completely still, her internal bioluminescence flickering in patterns he couldn't interpret. Then she began to laugh. It wasn't the polite membrane ripple from before. This was a full-body response, her entire form resonating with harmonics that made the viewport vibrate. Other beings at the reception turned to stare. Dominic felt his face burning, wondering if he'd just ended his career in the most spectacular fashion possible. But then Penelope reached out, a gesture she'd never made before in all their months of working together, and placed her hand against his chest. Through his dress uniform, he could feel the warmth of her touch, the subtle vibrations of her continued amusement. "You magnificent, impossible creature," she said, her voice full of something that sounded almost like wonder. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" "Ended my career," Dominic ventured weakly. "No, you beautiful fool." Her 3 eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him catch his breath. "You've just confirmed everything I've come to believe about your species. The Urathi have been civilized for longer than your sun has existed. In all that time, no Urathi has ever asked anyone from another species on what you call a date. The very concept is foreign to us, inefficient, emotionally messy, socially complicated." "So, that's a no?" Penelope's laugh rang out again, pure and crystalline. "That's a yes, Dominic. Enthusiastically yes. Because if there's one thing I've learned from humanity, it's that the most worthwhile things in existence are usually inefficient, emotionally messy, and socially complicated." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Besides, in 432 years, I've never felt this alive." Behind them, the party continued. The human officer had apparently won the arm wrestling match and was now teaching the Grendel warrior a drinking song. 2 Mirrodin diplomats were attempting to understand human humor. A Centauri musician was playing something that sounded suspiciously like jazz, and on the observation deck, bathed in the light of a newborn nebula, a man and an alien woman stood together, laughing at the beautiful absurdity of connection across the stars. Proof that humanity's greatest export wasn't technology or warfare, but the audacious belief that any divide could be bridged if you were brave enough to try. "So," Dominic said, grinning now, "dinner tomorrow? I should warn you. Human food is considered weird by most galactic standards." "Perfect," Penelope replied, her membranes rippling with delight. "I've spent 4 centuries being reasonable. I think it's time I tried weird."